Welcome to the Requirements chapter. In this chapter we discuss everything you need to know about user stories, including its characteristics, invest, 3C, and different types of backlogs. Now let's hear from the coach for more details.
Thanks, Dave. Let me take it from here. Collecting requirements. Collecting requirements from the stakeholders can occur through the following mechanisms: interviews, focus groups, and facilitated workshops. Now let us take a look at each of these. Interview. In this method, the stakeholders are interviewed one-on-one. This follows with the Agile principle, where communicating face-to-face is considered to be the most efficient and effective way of conveying information. Though this is time-consuming, this is considered to be one of the best methods in collecting requirements. Focus groups. Here the end users of the system work together and come up with the requirements. Facilitated workshops. In this method, teams from different domains are brought together to conduct requirements gathering sessions. Later, we will discuss about techniques such as brainstorming that may be used to create a large number of ideas, requirements, or features for the product. User stories. User stories are small pieces of functionality that describe what the user does with the system. They are described in an easy to understand format. User stories emphasize verbal rather than written communication and are considered more of a reminder to have a conversation with the customer. Therefore, user stories are neither complex nor comprehensive. To make it easy for the customer to write, stories are written in a dialogue format that is understood easily by both the customer and the developers. They are created such that they are at the right size for planning and works for iterative development. User stories encourages differing detail until the last responsible moment. As stated earlier, user stories provide a very high-level definition of a requirement and hence are easier than use cases, usage scenarios, or even the IEEE 830 style of specifications. To help create a user story, here is one suggested format. As a role, I want to do feature so that I can do reason or benefit. The reason or benefit part of the user story may or may not exist for all stories. User story samples. Just take a look at the sample user stories here for the case study that we presented earlier. Writing user stories. What are the major considerations in writing user stories? Let us understand them in detail. User stories are customer focused. They are typically written by domain experts, that is, mostly the customers. User stories can be created on simple tools such as index cards. Index cards provide a feeling of touch. They are small and easy to handle and comes in handy when sorting and moving stories around. priority, and estimated size may be optionally stated on the stories. Generally, you should start with high-level stories first, which are goals to be accomplished. Stories are to be written such that they test all features, which is equivalent to slicing the cake where all layers are touched upon. Write closed stories to prevent wrong assumptions being made in the interpretation. Constraints may be mentioned on the story cards. Keep the size of the story with the horizon in mind. Small stories for shorter iterations and bigger stories for larger iterations. It helps to keep the user interface out as long as possible, since these decisions can be made during the analysis stage. Also remember that not everything is a story. Where possible, include user roles in the stories. Follow the invest characteristics. We will touch upon this next. User story characteristics. Invest. User stories are expected to follow the invest attribute, which stands for independent, negotiable, valuable, estimatable, small, and testable. Independent. If user stories are independent, planning becomes easier since stories can be developed in any order. Therefore, where possible, avoid introducing dependencies between stories, because this may lead to prioritization and planning issues. Estimation becomes that much harder if dependencies exist. Stories should be loosely coupled so that they can be developed in any order. Negotiable. Clarity of the story comes through discussion with the customer and hence are negotiable. Stories are short descriptions of functionality, the details of which are to be negotiated in conversation with the customer. Including too much detail in a story may lead to the belief that the story is complete and comprehensive when in reality it is not. User story characteristics. Continued. Valuable. User stories when implemented must be valuable to the customer. Stories should be written such that the benefits to the customers are apparent. This will help them in prioritizing the stories during planning. Ideally, stories should be written by the customers themselves as they are the domain expert. Estimatable. User stories should be estimatable for planning purposes. If it cannot be estimated, it means the user story needs to be reworked. User story characteristics. Continued. Small. With small user stories, it is easier to comprehend, prioritize, and plan appropriately. The team can assist the customer in keeping the user stories small. If stories are too large or too small, it cannot be effectively used in planning. The team decides if a story is small or not based on its capabilities and the technology in use. If stories are large, compound, or complex, then they may have to be split into smaller stories. Lastly, testable. Stories should be testable to ensure that what is built is as per the needs of the customer. User story characteristics 3C. According to the author Ron Jeffries, the nature of a user story represents the 3 C's. That is, card, conversation, and confirmation. The card is a written description of the story used for planning and as a reminder. Conversation with the customer helps to flesh out the details of the story. Confirmation occurs by using acceptance tests to ensure customer intent is implemented.
To buy the full course and other services, visit ProplanX.com.
Can you answer these questions, please?
A story point can be best described as a unit of testing effort, B. unit of development effort, C. unit of story length, D. cost of a story. What is your choice? Unit of testing effort. A story point represents work effort, not specifically for testing alone. Unit of development effort. A story point is a fixed unit of development effort used in the relative sizing of user stories to estimate work effort. Unit of story length. There is no unit to measure the length of a story in Agile. Cost of a story. We do not measure cost in terms of story points. Typically, what is not included as part of story cards? A. Story description. B. Customer acceptance tests. C. Velocity. D. Priority. What is your choice? Story description. A story needs a description. Customer acceptance tests. These help to document the intent of the story and is used to test for completion. Velocity. This is not part of the story since velocity measures the number of story points completed in an iteration. Priority. User stories need to have priority to indicate the importance to the customer. Splitting stories. Why split user stories? When user stories are larger than an iteration or are made up of compound stories, it is time to split stories. Stories may also have to be split when not enough time is available to fit within the iteration, or when more accurate estimates are required. How to split? There are many suggested ways to split user stories. Let us take each one of them. Along data boundaries. For example, first start with stories about entering basic registration. Then move on to add stories for capturing profile information. And finally enhance it to stories that can capture user interests. On CRUD operations, that is, create, read, update and delete set of operations. Based on inherent operations in the story, such as first requiring a user to log in before accessing authorized items. By separating functional and non-functional aspects, where each of the splits has a different priority. Or by using a tracer bullet through the story. User story types. There are different types of user stories, such as business, technical, bug, and spike stories. User stories may also be classified based on how big they are. Epics or placeholder stories are a large story that may be split into smaller ones. These are of 1 to 3 months in her horizon and is considered a wave. A theme is a collection of user stories with a time horizon of 2 to 4 weeks. A user story is more at a day level with a time horizon of about a week. Difference between story, epic, and theme. This chart outlines the differences between a story, epic, and a theme. A task is the smallest unit of work measured in hours. For example, code and test a module bubble sort. Write abstract for the thesis paper. User story is the smallest piece of functionality, measured in days. For example, customer to enter address on the screen. The theme represents a collection of related user stories, usually worth 2 to 4 weeks. For example, all stories related to customer payments. Epic is a large story measured in 1 to 3 months. For example, create a PMI-ACP exam prep course. User stories are not. User stories are not as complex as the IEEE specifications or as detailed as the use cases and scenarios. In the IEEE 830 style specifications, the requirements are written in an impersonal form. For example, the system shall have, so on and so forth. Thankfully, user stories are not written in this impersonal form. User stories are not use cases, which is a generalized description of interaction between a system and actors. Finally, they are not scenarios, which is a detailed description of users' interaction with a computer. Tracer bullet. A tracer bullet is a concept of developing a small amount of functionality in all layers of the system. In the armed forces, it is a special bullet used to light up the path of firing. User stories should be delivered as a cohesive subset of all layers of a feature than delivering all of only one layer. For example, it helps to deliver partial user interface, partial middle tier, and partial database functionality rather than just delivering the complete user interface or the complete database functionality all by itself. Backlog types. There are three types of backlogs. The product backlog, which contains the latest prioritized list of user requirements. The release backlog contains functionality for the current release, while the iteration backlog contains work for the current iteration. Let us get into more details. Product backlog. This is maintained by the product owner. It contains changes, defects, requirements, and any other updates. Release backlog. This is a subset of the product backlog for the current release. This contains the high priority user stories selected by the product owner. Iteration backlog contains work or tasks to be implemented for the current iteration. This backlog cannot be changed except by the team. Rolling wave planning. Rolling wave planning is about understanding the high-level details of the subsequent phase or stages while working on the details of the current phase or stage. This is the same as considering the next steps. It is also known as adaptive planning. That is, we create details for the immediate work while providing high-level details for future work. Another term used to describe this is line of sight planning.
Here are the top benefits why you should buy this course now. Boost your career by preparing for PMI-ACP certification. Pay as you wish, a no-risk offer to you. Multimedia courseware. Realistic mock final exam and practice questions. Extensive testimonials. 21 hours course certificate. Courteous and prompt support. We hope you enjoyed the course. To buy the full course and other services, visit ProplanX.com.
Conclusion. Here is what we learned in this chapter. User stories are a means of defining requirements. User stories are expected to follow the invest and 3C attributes. A theme is a collection of related stories, while an epic is a large story. We have different types of stories, such as to record bugs, spikes, functional and non-functional requirements. Large stories are often split to accommodate them within an iteration. There are many types of backlogs, such as a product backlog, release backlog, and iteration backlog. Question and answer session. Team, do you have any questions?
If the customer is busy, would you suggest we have a dedicated product owner?
You must have a product owner since this role has a lot of responsibility. They may be asked to provide real-time requirement support, make feature and business decisions, define acceptance criteria, and be constantly available to answer questions. The product owner is often responsible for understanding and communicating the needs of the customer and should be able to constantly feed the development team in a timely fashion.
The manager is asking us to do additional work that is not part of the iteration backlog. What should we do?
Educate the manager that since the iteration has started, no change can be made to it. Her options are to add the additional work on the prioritized product backlog to be considered in the next iteration. Or if the change is urgent, then to cancel the current iteration and go back to planning.
To revise, click on the topic.
Acceptance criteria. The criteria for acceptance of the product as specified by the product owner during requirements. Product will be accepted only after it complies to this criteria. Epic. A large user story or a placeholder that needs to be disaggregated into smaller user stories before implementation. Invest. A set of criteria used to evaluate the quality of user stories, as coined by Bill Wake. Each user story should be independent, negotiable, valuable, estimatable, small-sized, and testable. Iteration backlog. This is the list of work that must be done during the next iteration. The list is derived by selecting stories from the top of the product backlog till the team can do no more. Release backlog contains a subset of the product backlog with major themes selected for the current release. Product owner selects high priority user stories. Rolling wave planning. Understanding the high-level details of the subsequent phase while working on the details of the current phase. Also called next steps, adaptive planning, or line of sight planning. Theme. This represents a set of related stories with a 2 to 4 weeks time horizon. Tracer bullet. In Agile, it is the piece of functionality that travels through all layers, essentially creating a cohesive subset of a feature. User story. These are small pieces of functionality that satisfy user needs. They are a very high level requirement written by customers on index cards with priority and estimated size.
Great. You made it to the end of the chapter.
Take up the quiz and activities that follow. Download content for offline study.
See you in the next session.